The first day at Westbrook Academy was supposed to be a fresh start. Marcus Williams gripped the worn leather strap of his trumpet case as he walked through the pristine hallways lined with portraits of distinguished alumni, all white faces staring down from gilded frames. The private school's marble floors echoed with the confident chatter of students whose families had attended here for generations. Marcus had earned his spot through a music scholarship, his talent opening doors that his family's bank account never could. The band room was tucked away in the arts wing, its walls covered with faded concert posters and shelves lined with instrument cases. Marcus found an empty chair in the trumpet section, between a red-haired girl who offered a nervous smile and a tall boy with perfectly styled blonde hair who didn't bother to look up from his phone. "All right, everyone, settle down," called Mrs. Peterson, the band director, as she tapped her baton against the music stand. "Before we begin, I'd like to welcome our new scholarship student, Marcus Williams. Marcus, would you like to introduce yourself?" The room fell silent. Marcus stood slowly, feeling dozens of eyes on him. "Hi, I'm Marcus. I've been playing trumpet for 8 years, and I'm excited to be here." A few polite claps scattered through the room, but Marcus caught the subtle exchange of glances between several students in the back row. 3 boys sat together like they owned the place, which, considering their families' donations to the school, they practically did. The leader was Tyler Ashford, whose father was a prominent lawyer in town. His lieutenants were Jake Morrison, son of the mayor, and Brad Kellerman, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in the district. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. As Mrs. Peterson distributed sheet music for their first piece, Tyler leaned over to his friends. "Great. They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel for scholarship kids now," he whispered, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus pretended not to notice, focusing on arranging his music on the stand. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. "Baby, there's gonna be people who try to make you feel small because of the color of your skin. But you remember, you're carrying the strength of generations. Don't let nobody dim your light." The rehearsal began with a warm-up scale. Marcus's trumpet sang out clear and strong, his tone rich and controlled. Several students turned to look, impressed despite themselves. Even Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly. "Excellent technique, Marcus," she said. "You'll be a wonderful addition to our first trumpet section." Tyler's jaw tightened. For 3 years he'd been the star of the trumpet section, despite his mediocre playing. His father's generous donations had always ensured he got the solos and the recognition. Now this scholarship kid was threatening to upset the natural order. After class, Marcus was packing his trumpet when Tyler appeared beside him, flanked by Jake and Brad. "So, scholarship boy," Tyler said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Where exactly did you come from? The hood?" "I'm from East Side," Marcus replied calmly, not looking up from his case. "Oh, East Side," Jake snickered. "That explains the urban sound quality." Marcus's hands stilled on his trumpet case. He'd heard this kind of coded language before, the way they said urban like it was something dirty, something less than. "My sound quality comes from practice," Marcus said evenly. 8 years of it." "Sure it does," Tyler said, stepping closer. "But you might want to remember that this isn't some inner-city program. We have standards here, traditions, and frankly, not everyone fits." The message was clear. Marcus closed his trumpet case with deliberate care, his movements controlled and precise. Years of martial arts training with his uncle had taught him to recognize aggression in all its forms and to remain calm in the face of it. "I'll keep that in mind," Marcus said, standing to face Tyler directly. Despite being the same age, Marcus was taller and clearly more athletic. Tyler took an involuntary step back. "Come on, guys," Tyler said, trying to save face. "Let's leave the charity case to practice. He's going to need it." As they walked away, Marcus heard Brad mutter, "Did you see the way he looked at Tyler? Probably thinks he's tough." Marcus slung his trumpet case over his shoulder and headed for the door. In the hallway, he passed a bulletin board covered with photos from past concerts and competitions. Every face was white except for one, a black girl in a group photo from 5 years ago, standing slightly apart from the others with the same careful smile Marcus was learning to wear. The next few days fell into a pattern. In band class, Marcus excelled. Mrs. Peterson began giving him more challenging parts and even started featuring him in small solos. But outside the protective bubble of the rehearsal room, Tyler and his friends made their presence known. It started small. Marcus would find his locker combination changed, forcing him to wait for maintenance to reset it. His lunch would mysteriously disappear from the cafeteria table when he went to get a drink. In the hallways, Tyler's crew would form a walking blockade, forcing Marcus to either push through or take a longer route to class. The psychological warfare was expertly crafted, nothing that could be easily reported or proven, but constant enough to create an atmosphere of tension and isolation. Marcus found himself eating lunch alone, studying alone, walking through the halls with his head down. "How's school going, baby?" his grandmother asked one evening as she set a plate of her famous cornbread in front of him. "It's fine, Nana," Marcus said, not meeting her eyes. She sat down across from him, her weathered hands folded on the table. "Marcus Antoine Williams, I've known you since you were born. Fine is what you say when you're trying to protect someone's feelings. What's really going on?" Marcus looked up at his grandmother's kind but knowing eyes. She'd raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 7, and she could read him like a book. "There are some kids at school who don't think I belong there," he said carefully. "Because you're black." It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded. "And what are you doing about it?" "Nothing," Marcus said. "I'm just trying to keep my head down and focus on my music." His grandmother was quiet for a long moment. "Your Uncle Jerome is coming by tomorrow after school. Maybe you should talk to him." Uncle Jerome was Marcus's father's younger brother, a former Marine who'd found his calling in mixed martial arts after his service. He owned a small gym on the east side where he trained fighters and taught self-defense to kids from the neighborhood. Marcus had been training with him since he was 10, learning discipline, respect, and the art of controlled violence. The next day brought a new escalation. Marcus arrived at his locker to find it had been vandalized with a crude drawing of a monkey, and the words, "Go back to Africa," scratched into the metal. His stomach clenched with anger and humiliation as other students walked by, some staring, others pointedly looking away. He reported it to the main office where Assistant Principal Davidson, a thin white man with nervous eyes, took his statement with obvious discomfort. "I'll look into this, Marcus," Davidson said, barely glancing at the photos Marcus had taken. "But you know, sometimes these things can be misunderstandings. Maybe someone was just being juvenile, not necessarily targeting you specifically." "It's on my locker," Marcus said, the only black student in the music program. "Yes, well, I'll speak with the custodial staff about getting it cleaned up. And Marcus, perhaps it's best not to make a big deal about this. Sometimes these situations resolve themselves if we don't escalate them." Marcus stared at the man in disbelief. "You're asking me not to escalate being called a monkey? I'm asking you to consider the larger picture. Westbrook Academy prides itself on unity and inclusion. Stirring up controversy might not be in anyone's best interest." The message was clear. Keep quiet, don't rock the boat, and maybe the problem would go away. Marcus left the office with his faith in the system shaken, but not yet broken. In band class that afternoon, Tyler was particularly smug. As they worked through a challenging piece, he made a point of playing his parts extra loud, drowning out Marcus's more precise playing. When Mrs. Peterson asked the trumpets to play a passage alone, Tyler deliberately played off-tempo, throwing off the entire section. "Let's try that again," Mrs. Peterson said. "Trumpets, remember to watch my baton." This time, Marcus played his part perfectly, his clear tone cutting through Tyler's deliberately sloppy playing. Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly at Marcus, and Tyler's face flushed red. After class, as Marcus was packing up, Tyler approached with his usual entourage. "Nice playing today, scholarship boy," Tyler said, his voice full of false congratulations. "Too bad you won't be around much longer to show off." "What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus asked. "Oh, just that scholarship students tend to have academic difficulties, especially when they're more focused on making noise than actually studying." Jake snickered. "Yeah, and when their grades slip, bye-bye scholarship." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "My grades are fine. For now," Tyler said with a cold smile. "But things happen. Papers get lost. Test answers get misunderstood. It's a shame how these things work out." The threat was clear. Tyler's family had connections throughout the school, and Marcus was beginning to understand just how deep those connections ran. That evening, Uncle Jerome arrived at the house carrying a bag of takeout and his usual easy smile. He was a compact man with graying temples and scars on his knuckles that told stories of his younger, more reckless days. "How's my favorite nephew?" he asked, pulling Marcus into a bear hug. "Your only nephew," Marcus replied, but he was smiling for the first time in days. Over dinner, Marcus found himself opening up about the situation at school. Uncle Jerome listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "They're trying to break you mentally before they ever have to face you physically," Jerome said finally. "It's a classic intimidation tactic. Make you feel isolated, powerless, like you don't belong." "Maybe I don't," Marcus said quietly. Jerome's expression hardened. "Boy, don't you ever let me hear you say that again. You earned your spot at that school. Your talent, your work, your dedication, that's what got you there. Not their daddy's money or their family name." "But what can I do? The school won't help. They basically told me to keep quiet and hope it goes away." "They told you to be a good little black boy and not cause trouble," Jerome said bluntly. "Sound familiar?" Marcus nodded. They'd had this conversation before, about the long history of black people being told to wait, to be patient, to not rock the boat. "So what do I do?" Jerome leaned forward. "First, you document everything. Every incident, every threat, every time the school fails to protect you. Second, you remember your training. Not just the physical stuff, the mental discipline. You stay calm, you stay focused, and you don't let them provoke you into doing something stupid. And third, you trust that the truth has a way of coming out. But sometimes it needs a little help." If you're enjoying this story of courage and standing up to bullies, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you would do in this situation. The next week brought a new level of harassment. Marcus arrived at school to find flyers posted on bulletin boards around campus. They were disguised as a missing person poster, but featured a photo of Marcus with the caption, "Lost. One scholarship student. If found, please return to the ghetto where he belongs." The flyers had been printed on official school letterhead, suggesting someone with administrative access was involved. Marcus tore down everyone he could find, his hands shaking with rage and humiliation. In the hallway, he could hear students whispering and laughing. Some looked at him with pity, others with barely concealed amusement. The message was clear. He was a joke, an outsider, someone who didn't belong. Mrs. Peterson found him in the band room during lunch, sitting alone with his trumpet. "Marcus, I heard about the flyers," she said, sitting down beside him. "I'm appalled. This isn't what Westbrook Academy stands for." "Isn't it?" Marcus asked bitterly. "Because it seems like business as usual to me. I've reported it to the administration. They're investigating. Like they investigated my locker." Mrs. Peterson was quiet for a moment. "I know this is difficult, but you're playing." "Marcus, you have a gift. Don't let them take that away from you. What's the point? Even if I'm good enough, they'll find a way to get rid of me. The point is that music is truth, and truth is powerful. More powerful than their hatred, more powerful than their fear." That afternoon, Marcus decided to take a different route to his car after school. As he walked through the student parking lot, he noticed Tyler and his friends gathered around something. As he got closer, he realized they were surrounding his grandmother's old Honda, the only car in the lot without a luxury badge. "Look what we have here," Tyler called out as Marcus approached. The Ghetto Mobile. Marcus's car had been vandalized. The word "nuh-uh" was spray-painted across the windshield in red letters. The tires had been slashed, and the mirrors were broken. "You did this?" Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. "Prove it," Tyler said with a smirk. "Could have been anyone. Lots of people around here don't appreciate certain elements bringing down the neighborhood." Jake laughed. "Maybe your welfare check will cover the repairs." Brad joined in. "Assuming you even know how to drive, don't they just walk everywhere in your neighborhood?" Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before a fight. His hands clenched into fists, and he took a step forward. Tyler and his friends tensed, ready for confrontation. Then Marcus heard his uncle's voice in his head. "Control your emotions, or they'll control you." He took a deep breath, unclenched his fists, and pulled out his phone to document the damage. The three boys watched in confusion as Marcus methodically photographed every angle of the vandalized car. "What are you doing?" Tyler demanded. "Evidence," Marcus said simply. "Evidence of what? You can't prove we did anything." Marcus looked up from his phone. "Maybe not, but I can prove it happened, and I can prove you were here when I found it." Tyler's confident expression faltered slightly. So what? Being in a parking lot isn't a crime. No, but this is. Marcus held up his phone, showing that he'd been recording their conversation. Harassment, intimidation, and confession to property damage. All time-stamped and geotagged. The three boys exchanged nervous glances. In their arrogance, they'd assumed Marcus would react with anger, not strategy. "Delete that," Tyler said, his voice losing its casual confidence. "I don't think so," Marcus replied. "But thanks for the content. This should be interesting to show the police." As Marcus called his uncle for a ride, he could hear Tyler and his friends arguing in hushed tones. They'd expected to break him, to provoke him into a reaction that would get him expelled and removed from their world. Instead, they'd given him exactly what he needed: proof. That night, Uncle Jerome examined the photos and listened to the recording with growing anger. "These little entitled brats think they can terrorize you because Daddy's money will protect them," he said. "They're about to learn different. The school will probably just sweep this under the rug too," Marcus said. "Maybe, but this isn't just about the school anymore. This is criminal property damage and harassment. We're going to the police." "Will that help? Tyler's dad is a lawyer. Jake's dad is the mayor. And I'm a United States Marine who served 3 tours in Afghanistan," Jerome said firmly. "I didn't fight for this country so some rich brats could terrorize my nephew because of his skin color. We're going to fight this the right way, with truth, evidence, and persistence." The next morning, Marcus returned to school with a rental car and a new determination. He'd filed a police report, and Detective Sarah Chen, a Korean-American officer who'd dealt with hate crimes before, had taken his case seriously. In band class, Tyler and his friends were notably subdued. They kept glancing at Marcus, trying to gauge his reaction to their vandalism. But Marcus sat calmly in his chair, his trumpet gleaming in the fluorescent light, and played with the same precision and passion he always had. After class, Tyler approached him with a different energy, less arrogant, more desperate. "Look, about yesterday," Tyler began. "What about it?" Marcus asked, not looking up from his music. "Maybe we got a little carried away. You know how it is. School stress, everyone's competitive. Competitive enough to commit felony property damage." Tyler's face went pale. "It wasn't, we didn't. The police seem to think you did." "The police?" Jake's voice cracked slightly. "Detective Chen was very interested in my recording. Apparently, hate crimes are a priority for the department." The three boys looked at each other in panic. In their privileged world, consequences were rare and usually negotiable. The idea that their actions might have real legal ramifications was foreign and terrifying. "Maybe we can work something out," Tyler said, his voice pleading. "You know, make this go away quietly." Marcus finally looked up, his expression calm but resolute. "The time for quiet was before you decided to terrorize me. Now it's time for truth." As the weeks passed, the dynamic at school began to shift. Word of the police investigation spread, and students who had previously ignored Marcus's situation began to take notice. Some offered quiet support, others maintained their distance, but the casual cruelty that had defined his first month at Westbrook Academy was replaced by a tense uncertainty. Mrs. Peterson became a more active advocate, pushing the administration for concrete action. A few other teachers, who had witnessed the harassment but remained silent, began to speak up. The comfortable conspiracy of silence that had protected Tyler and his friends was beginning to crack, but the trio wasn't done. If anything, the threat of legal consequences made them more desperate and more dangerous. They needed Marcus gone before the investigation could progress further, before their carefully constructed world of privilege and impunity could be exposed. The trap they set was subtle and devastating. During a particularly challenging rehearsal, Marcus found himself struggling with a complex piece. His trumpet technique was flawless, but the sheet music seemed wrong somehow. Notes that didn't match the melody he'd practiced, rhythms that threw off his timing. It wasn't until after class that he realized someone had switched his music with a different arrangement. By then, it was too late. Mrs. Peterson had noticed his unusual mistakes, and Tyler had been quick to offer his own flawless performance of the correct piece. "I'm concerned about Marcus," Tyler said with false sincerity as other students filed out of the room. "He seems to be struggling with the material. Maybe the pressure is getting to him." Mrs. Peterson frowned. "That's not like him. Marcus is one of our most technically proficient players." "Maybe at his old school," Tyler continued. "But our standards are different here. Not everyone can handle the transition. Marcus wanted to object, to explain about the switched music, but he had no proof. It would sound like an excuse, like he was trying to blame others for his own failures. As he walked to his locker after class, Marcus felt the weight of isolation settling on his shoulders again. Tyler and his friends had found a new strategy, undermining his musical ability, the very thing that had earned him his place at Westbrook Academy. The campaign escalated over the following days. Marcus would find his trumpet case mysteriously unlocked, his mouthpiece missing or damaged. During rehearsals, Tyler would accidentally bump into him during crucial passages, throwing off his timing and concentration. Most insidiously, Tyler began a whisper campaign about Marcus's musical background, suggesting that his urban training had left him unprepared for classical music, that his natural rhythm was better suited to jazz or hip-hop than serious concert band repertoire. The coded racism was subtle but effective. Teachers who had initially been impressed by Marcus's skill began to question whether he was truly Westbrook Academy material. His confidence, already shaken by weeks of harassment, began to crumble. It was during this lowest point that Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He was going to quit. The scholarship, the opportunity, the chance to prove himself. None of it was worth the daily humiliation and psychological warfare. He was packing his trumpet case for what he thought would be the last time when Mrs. Peterson approached him. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about the spring concert," she said. "I'd like you to perform the solo in our featured piece." Marcus looked up in surprise. "The solo? Your tone quality is exceptional and your technical skill is advancing rapidly. I think you'd be perfect for it. But Tyler will be fine with a supporting role. This is about what's best for the music, not about tradition or seniority." Marcus felt a spark of hope rekindle in his chest. Maybe he'd been wrong to give up. Maybe his music was still worth fighting for. That evening, he called Uncle Jerome with mixed emotions. "I'm proud of you for hanging in there," Jerome said. "But I can hear something in your voice. What's really going on?" Marcus told him about the sabotage, the whisper campaign, the constant pressure to prove himself while being set up to fail. "They're trying to break you mentally," Jerome said. "Make you doubt your own abilities, your own worth. It's psychological warfare, and it's working. What do I do? You remember who you are. Not who they say you are, not who they want you to be. Who you actually are. And who is that? You're Marcus Williams, grandson of Ruby Williams, nephew of Jerome Williams, son of Marcus Sr. and Angela Williams. You carry the strength of generations in your blood. You're a musician, a scholar, and a fighter. And you don't quit when things get hard." As they talked, Marcus felt his resolve strengthening. He thought about his grandmother, who had faced down segregation and discrimination with quiet dignity. He thought about his uncle, who had fought for his country and come home to build something positive in his community. He thought about his parents, who had worked multiple jobs to give him opportunities they'd never had. "I'm not quitting," Marcus said finally. "Good," Jerome replied, "because tomorrow we're going to start preparing you for war." The next afternoon, Marcus found himself in Uncle Jerome's gym, surrounded by the familiar sounds of training, the rhythm of heavy bags being pounded, the squeak of sneakers on mats, the sharp commands of coaches pushing their fighters to excel. "Fighting isn't just about physical technique," Jerome said as they warmed up. "It's about mental discipline. Your enemies at school are trying to defeat you psychologically before you ever have to face them physically." Marcus worked through his combinations on the heavy bag, each strike precise and controlled. Years of training had given him excellent technique, but Jerome was pushing him to access something deeper. "They want you angry," Jerome continued. "Angry people make mistakes. Angry people can be controlled. What do you do instead?" "Stay calm," Marcus replied between strikes. "Stay focused." "Good. But there's more. What's your greatest weapon?" Marcus paused, considering. "My mind?" "Your truth," Jerome corrected. "The truth of who you are, what you've earned, what you deserve. That's what they're trying to take from you. That's what you have to protect." They worked for 2 hours, focusing not just on physical techniques, but on mental preparation. Jerome taught Marcus breathing exercises to control his adrenaline, visualization techniques to maintain focus under pressure, and most importantly, how to project confidence even when he felt anything but confident. "They've been winning because they're playing by their rules," Jerome said as they cooled down. "Time to change the game." Meanwhile, Tyler and his friends were dealing with their own pressure. The police investigation was progressing, and Detective Chen had been thorough in her interviews. Students who had witnessed the harassment were coming forward, and the pattern of behavior was becoming undeniable. Tyler's father, Richard Ashford, was a prominent criminal defense lawyer, but even he was struggling to contain the situation. The evidence was mounting, and the department was treating it as a hate crime, which carried serious consequences. "You boys need to understand the gravity of this situation," Richard told his son and his friends in his downtown office. "This isn't going away quietly. The police have video evidence, witness statements, and a clear pattern of racially motivated harassment." "But it was just school stuff," Tyler protested. "We were just messing around." "You vandalized his car with racial slurs," Richard said sharply. "That's felony property damage with hate crime enhancements. You could be looking at serious jail time." Jake's father, Mayor Morrison, was equally concerned. "This is becoming a public relations nightmare. The NAACP is asking questions. The local news is sniffing around. If this blows up, it could affect all of us." Brad's family, while wealthy, had less political influence than the others. They were already talking about sending him to a private school in another state, cutting their losses before the situation got worse. "We need to neutralize this before it goes any further," Richard said. "That means the Williams boy has to be discredited or removed from the equation." Back at school, the campaign against Marcus intensified. Tyler and his friends, now desperate, abandoned subtlety in favor of more direct confrontation. They began following Marcus through the halls, making loud comments designed to provoke a reaction. "Hey, diversity hire," Tyler called out as Marcus walked to his locker. "How's that investigation going? My dad says you don't have a case." Marcus kept walking, his uncle's training kicking in. He controlled his breathing, maintained his pace, and didn't give them the reaction they wanted. "You know what happens to people who make false accusations?" Jake added. "They get sued for defamation. Your whole family could lose everything." Marcus stopped and turned to face them. His expression was calm, almost serene, but there was steel in his eyes. "Is that a threat?" he asked quietly. "It's a fact," Tyler replied. "You're messing with the wrong families." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I'll make sure to tell Detective Chen you said that." As he walked away, he heard Tyler curse under his breath. They were losing control of the narrative, and they knew it. In band class, the tension was palpable. Mrs. Peterson had announced that auditions for the spring concert solo would be held the following week, and Tyler was furious about having to compete for a part he'd considered his by right. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to his friends. 3 years I've been first chair. 3 years I've had the solos. Now some diversity hire shows up and suddenly it's all about merit. Maybe we should remind him why he doesn't belong here," Jake suggested. "How?" "Everything we do gets reported to the police." "Not everything," Brad said with a cruel smile. "Some things are harder to prove than others." The plan they hatched was simple but vicious. During the solo auditions, they would create a disruption that would throw off Marcus's performance. Tyler would then give a flawless audition, proving that he was the better choice for the solo. But Marcus was ready for them. Uncle Jerome had taught him to expect attacks at his most vulnerable moments, and he'd prepared accordingly. The morning of the auditions, Marcus arrived at school early to practice in the band room. He found Tyler already there, playing through the solo piece with unnecessary loudness. "Oh, didn't see you there," Tyler said with false surprise. "Don't mind me, just getting in some last-minute practice. You know how it is. Some of us don't want to embarrass ourselves in front of the whole class." Marcus unpacked his trumpet without responding. He'd learned that Tyler fed off confrontation, and starving him of it was the most effective response. As other students arrived for the auditions, Marcus noticed that several of Tyler's friends had positioned themselves strategically around the room. They were planning something, and Marcus needed to be ready. Mrs. Peterson called the auditions to order. "We'll be performing in alphabetical order by last name. Tyler, you'll be first, followed by Marcus." Tyler stood confidently and began to play. His technique was solid, if uninspired, and he delivered the piece with the kind of polished competence that came from expensive private lessons. He was good, not exceptional, but good enough to maintain his position if no one challenged him. As Tyler finished, polite applause filled the room. He smiled smugly at Marcus, confident that he'd set the bar high enough to maintain his dominance. "Thank you, Tyler," Mrs. Peterson said. "Marcus, you're up." Marcus stood and walked to the front of the room. He could feel the tension in the air. the expectation that he would either prove himself worthy or confirm their suspicions that he didn't belong. He raised his trumpet to his lips and began to play. The first few notes were perfect, clear, strong, and emotionally resonant. Marcus had chosen to interpret the piece with a more soulful approach than Tyler's technically correct but emotionally flat performance. Then Jake accidentally knocked over a music stand. The crash echoed through the room and several students gasped. Marcus's playing faltered for just a moment, his concentration broken by the disruption. But instead of stopping, Marcus did something unexpected. He incorporated the disruption into his performance, using the momentary silence to create a dramatic pause before launching into the most challenging passage of the piece. The room fell silent as Marcus's trumpet sang out with passion and technical perfection. He wasn't just playing the notes, he was telling a story, communicating emotion that touched everyone who heard it. As he finished, the silence stretched for several seconds before erupting into genuine applause. Even some of Tyler's friends were clapping, caught up in the power of the performance. Mrs. Peterson's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That was extraordinary, Marcus. I've never heard that piece performed with such emotional depth." Tyler's face had gone pale. He'd thrown his best punch, and Marcus had not only survived it but turned it into a moment of triumph. "I think we have our soloist," Mrs. Peterson announced. The applause continued, but Marcus could see the rage building in Tyler's eyes. He'd been publicly humiliated, his sense of superiority shattered in front of his peers. After class, Tyler cornered Marcus in the hallway. "You think you're so special," Tyler hissed. "You think you can just waltz in here and take what's mine?" "I earned it," Marcus replied calmly. "You earned nothing. You're a diversity hire, a token, a charity case. And when this investigation blows over, when the attention moves on to something else, you'll still be just another." "Careful," Marcus interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "You're already facing hate crime charges. You really want to add more evidence?" Tyler's hand moved to his phone, and Marcus realized he was being recorded. His training kicked in, and he forced himself to remain calm despite the slur that had been cut short. "You're not going to last here," Tyler continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "One way or another you're going to be gone, and when you are, things will go back to the way they're supposed to be." Marcus looked at Tyler with something approaching pity. "You're right about one thing," he said. "Things are going to change, but not the way you think." That evening, Marcus shared the recording with Detective Chen, who added it to her growing file of evidence. The investigation was nearing its conclusion, and the case against Tyler and his friends was becoming stronger each day. But Marcus knew that legal consequences weren't enough. The system that had protected these boys for so long was still in place, and without fundamental change, the next scholarship student would face the same treatment. "We need to expose this publicly," he told Uncle Jerome. "Make it impossible for them to hide behind their family's influence." "That's dangerous," Jerome warned. "Once you go public, there's no going back. They'll come at you with everything they have." "They're already coming at me with everything they have," Marcus replied. "At least this way, other people will see what's really happening." Jerome studied his nephew's face and saw the determination there. "All right, but we do this smart. We control the narrative, we have our evidence in order, and we make sure the truth comes out the right way." The next phase of their plan required patience and precision. Marcus continued to excel in band class, his preparation for the spring concert becoming a symbol of his resilience. Mrs. Peterson, now fully aware of the harassment he'd faced, became a strong advocate within the school, but the administration continued to drag its feet. Assistant Principal Davidson had conducted a perfunctory investigation that amounted to little more than asking Tyler and his friends if they were responsible for the harassment. When they denied it, he seemed satisfied to let the matter drop. "These are serious accusations," Davidson told Marcus during one of their meetings. "We can't just take your word for it. These boys come from good families. They're excellent students. It's hard to believe they would engage in this kind of behavior." "I have recordings," Marcus reminded him. "Those recordings are ambiguous. They could be interpreted in different ways." Marcus stared at the man in disbelief. "One of them used a racial slur on tape." "I didn't hear that," Davidson said quickly. "And even if something inappropriate was said, boys will be boys. Sometimes they say things in the heat of the moment that they don't really mean." It was becoming clear that the school had no intention of taking meaningful action. They were hoping the police investigation would resolve the matter quietly, allowing them to maintain their reputation while avoiding any substantial changes to their culture. Marcus realized that if he wanted justice, he would have to take matters into his own hands. The spring concert was scheduled for the first Friday in May, and Marcus threw himself into preparation with an intensity that impressed even Mrs. Peterson. He practiced for hours each day, perfecting not just the technical aspects of his solo, but the emotional connection that had made his audition so powerful. Uncle Jerome watched his nephew's dedication with pride and concern. "You're pushing yourself pretty hard," he observed after one particularly long practice session at the gym. "This solo is my chance to prove I belong here," Marcus replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Not just to them, but to everyone who's watching. You already proved that. The moment you walked into that school, earned that scholarship, and kept your head up despite everything they threw at you. But it's not enough to just survive," Marcus said. "I need to excel. I need to show them that their hatred didn't break me. It made me stronger." Jerome nodded, understanding. He'd felt the same way during his military service, the need to not just meet expectations, but exceed them, to prove that he deserved every opportunity he'd earned. Meanwhile, Tyler's desperation was reaching dangerous levels. The police investigation had expanded beyond the original vandalism charges. Detective Chen had uncovered a pattern of harassment that went back months, involving multiple incidents and several witnesses who had finally found the courage to come forward. Tyler's father was now talking about plea bargains and damage control rather than fighting the charges. The family's reputation, carefully built over generations, was crumbling under the weight of their son's actions. "You need to understand," Richard Ashford told his son during a tense meeting in his office, "that this is no longer about winning or losing. This is about minimizing the damage to our family's future." "But Dad, I said a lot of things before I realized how much evidence they had against you," Richard interrupted. "Video recordings, witness statements, documented harassment. This isn't going away." Tyler's world was collapsing around him. His assured place at an Ivy League university was in jeopardy. His social status at school had evaporated, and his friends were distancing themselves as their own families faced scrutiny. In his mind, all of this was Marcus's fault. If the scholarship student had just known his place, accepted his position at the bottom of the social hierarchy, none of this would have happened. The solution, Tyler decided, was to remove Marcus from the equation permanently. The plan he conceived was elegantly simple and brutally effective. During the spring concert, in front of hundreds of parents, alumni, and community members, Tyler would create a confrontation that would force Marcus to react. If Marcus fought back, he could be expelled for violence. If he didn't, Tyler would escalate until he had no choice. Either way, Marcus would be gone, and Tyler's problems would disappear with him. The week before the concert, tensions at school reached a boiling point. Tyler and his remaining allies, Jake had transferred to another school under pressure from his father, began a campaign of psychological warfare designed to unnerve Marcus before his big performance. They would appear wherever Marcus was practicing, making loud comments about his technique or his chances of failure. They spread rumors that he was on steroids, that his uncle was involved in illegal fighting, that his scholarship was obtained through fraud. The whisper campaign was sophisticated and vicious, designed to plant seeds of doubt about Marcus's character and achievements. Some students dismissed the rumors, but others began to look at him with suspicion. Mrs. Peterson noticed the change in atmosphere and tried to intervene. "Marcus, if these boys are bothering you during practice, I can arrange for you to use a different room." "Thank you, but I'm fine," Marcus replied. "I won't let them drive me into hiding." "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," she said gently. "Your talent speaks for itself." "It's not about talent anymore," Marcus said. "It's about principle. If I back down now, the next student like me will face the same treatment." Mrs. Peterson studied his face and saw the determination there. She'd taught at Westbrook Academy for 15 years, and she'd watched too many talented minority students leave rather than endure the subtle and not-so-subtle pressures of the environment. "You're braver than I was at your age," she said finally. "What do you mean?" "I mean that when I was a student here, I saw things that I should have spoken up about. I kept quiet because it was easier, because I didn't want to rock the boat. I won't make that mistake again." That conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Mrs. Peterson went from being a sympathetic teacher to an active ally, documenting incidents and building her own case for systemic change within the school. The night before the concert, Marcus couldn't sleep. He stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the quiet neighborhood where he'd grown up, thinking about how much his life had changed since starting at Westbrook Academy. His grandmother found him there, as she had so many times during his childhood when nightmares or worries kept him awake. "Can't sleep, baby?" she asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Just thinking," Marcus replied, not turning from the window. "About tomorrow? About everything. About why some people hate others for things they can't control. About whether fighting back makes me just like them." His grandmother was quiet for a long moment. "You know, when I was your age, I had to sit in the back of the bus, use separate water fountains, go to separate schools. There were people who said I should be grateful for what I had, that I shouldn't push for more. What did you do?" "I kept pushing, not with anger or hatred, but with dignity and determination. I taught your father and your uncle that they deserved every opportunity anyone else had, and that they should never accept less." She stood and walked to the window beside him. "Tomorrow, when you play that solo, you're not just playing for yourself. You're playing for every child who's been told they don't belong, every student who's been made to feel less than. You carry their hopes with you." Marcus felt the weight of that responsibility, but also the strength that came with it. He wasn't alone in this fight. He was part of a legacy of courage that stretched back generations. "I won't let them down," he said quietly. "I know you won't," his grandmother replied. "You're a Williams. We don't back down from what's right." The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the outdoor spring concert. Marcus arrived at school early for final rehearsal, his trumpet case in hand and his mind focused on the performance ahead. This is about to get intense. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because stories like this one show us what real strength looks like. What's your prediction for how this ends? Drop it in the comments below. The rehearsal went smoothly, with Marcus delivering his solo flawlessly. Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly as the last notes faded, and even some of the students who had been influenced by Tyler's whisper campaign looked impressed. "Remember," she told the band, "tonight we're performing for our families and our community. Play with pride, play with passion, and show them what Westbrook Academy music is all about." Tyler sat in the back row, his jaw clenched with barely contained rage. His final chance to humiliate Marcus was slipping away, and he knew it. As the students dispersed to prepare for the evening performance, Tyler made his move. He followed Marcus to the parking lot, where his uncle was waiting to drive him home for dinner before the concert. "Hey, scholarship boy," Tyler called out. "Having second thoughts about tonight?" Marcus turned to face him, his expression calm. "No second thoughts. I'm ready." "Are you? Because I heard something interesting about your uncle, about his gym, about the kind of training he does there." Jerome stepped out of his car, his eyes fixed on Tyler. "You got something to say, son?" Tyler's bravado faltered slightly in the face of Jerome's military bearing, but desperation drove him forward. "Just wondering if your nephew learned his fighting skills from you. You know, for when he finally snaps and shows his true colors." "My nephew doesn't need to fight anyone," Jerome said evenly. "He's got something better than fists. He's got talent, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right." "We'll see about that," Tyler muttered, walking away. Jerome watched him go, then turned to Marcus. "That boy's planning something for tonight." "I know," Marcus replied. "I can feel it. You ready for whatever he throws at you?" Marcus thought about everything he'd learned over the past months, not just the martial arts techniques, but the mental discipline, the emotional control, the power of truth over hatred. "I'm ready," he said. That evening, the auditorium was packed with parents, students, and community members. The Westbrook Academy Spring Concert was a major social event, attended by the town's most influential families. Marcus stood backstage with the other musicians, adjusting his bow tie and running through fingering patterns to keep his hands limber. He could hear the crowd settling into their seats, the low murmur of conversation mixing with the sounds of instruments being tuned. Mrs. Peterson gathered the band for final instructions. "Tonight we represent not just ourselves but our school and our community. Play with honor, play with heart, and remember that music has the power to bring people together." As they took the stage, Marcus scanned the audience and saw his grandmother and uncle in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. Detective Chen was there too, along with several other community members who had become aware of his situation through word of mouth. The first half of the concert proceeded without incident. The band played a selection of classical and contemporary pieces, each one building toward Marcus's solo performance in the second half. During intermission, Marcus remained backstage, using the breathing techniques Jerome had taught him to stay calm and focused. He could hear Tyler and his friends moving around in the hallway outside, their voices carrying a tension that put him on alert. When the second half began, Mrs. Peterson introduced the featured piece with special recognition for Marcus as the soloist. The applause was warm and encouraging, and Marcus felt a surge of confidence as he stood to take his position at center stage. The opening notes of the piece began, played by the full ensemble. Marcus counted the measures, preparing for his entrance, when Tyler made his move. "This is wrong," Tyler shouted, standing up in the middle of the audience. "This solo belongs to me. I've earned it." Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd as Tyler pushed past other audience members and started toward the stage. Jake and Brad, despite their families' attempts to distance themselves, followed their friend in what appeared to be a pre-planned disruption. Mrs. Peterson stopped conducting, and the music died away as Tyler climbed onto the stage. 3 years I've been first chair," he yelled, his voice echoing through the auditorium. 3 years I've had the solos, and now some diversity hire thinks he can just take what's mine." Marcus stood frozen at center stage, his trumpet still raised, as Tyler approached him with wild eyes and clenched fists. "Tyler, stop this immediately," Mrs. Peterson commanded, but Tyler ignored her. "You don't belong here," Tyler snarled at Marcus. "You never did. This school, this music, this life, it's not for people like you." The audience was stunned into silence, watching in horror as Tyler's mask of civility finally slipped completely away. "Fight me," Tyler demanded, shoving Marcus hard in the chest. "Come on, show everyone what you really are. Show them the violent thug I know you are inside." Marcus staggered back but didn't fall. Jerome's training had taught him to absorb impact and maintain balance. More importantly, it had taught him to control his reaction under pressure. "I'm not going to fight you," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the silent auditorium. "Yes, you are," Tyler said, shoving him again. "Because that's what your kind does. You get angry, you get violent, and then everyone sees that you don't belong in civilized society." Jake and Brad had reached the stage now, forming a circle around Marcus. The trap was closing, designed to force him into a reaction that would justify their hatred and provide an excuse for his expulsion. "Come on, scholarship boy," Jake taunted. "Your uncle taught you to fight, didn't he? Show us what you learned in the ghetto." Marcus could feel his adrenaline spiking, his body preparing for conflict despite his mental discipline. Every instinct screamed at him to defend himself, to strike back at these boys who had tormented him for months. But then he heard his grandmother's voice in his mind. Music is truth, and truth is powerful. Instead of raising his fists, Marcus raised his trumpet. The auditorium held its collective breath as Marcus raised his trumpet to his lips. Tyler's face contorted with confusion and rage. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected or planned for. "What are you doing?" Tyler demanded. "I said fight me." Marcus began to play. The first notes were soft, haunting, a melody that seemed to emerge from the depths of his soul. It wasn't the scheduled piece from the concert program. Instead, Marcus played a spiritual his grandmother had taught him, a song that had sustained his ancestors through slavery, segregation, and countless struggles for dignity and justice. The music filled the auditorium like a prayer, each note carrying the weight of history and the power of hope. Tyler stood frozen, his raised fist looking suddenly foolish and small in the face of such beauty. "Stop that," Tyler said, but his voice had lost its aggressive edge. The music was transforming the moment, shifting the narrative from violence to something far more profound. Marcus continued to play, his eyes closed, channeling generations of strength through his trumpet. The melody evolved, incorporating elements of blues, jazz, and classical music, a musical autobiography that told the story of his people's journey from bondage to freedom. In the audience, people began to weep. Parents who had brought their children to a simple school concert found themselves witnessing something sacred, a young man responding to hatred with art, to violence with beauty. Mrs. Peterson understood what Marcus was doing and quietly signaled the band to join in. One by one, the other musicians picked up the melody, creating a rich harmonic backdrop for Marcus's solo. Even some of Tyler's supporters in the audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The contrast between Tyler's angry threats and Marcus's transcendent response was impossible to ignore. Tyler looked around desperately, realizing that his carefully planned confrontation was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of revealing Marcus as a violent threat, He had exposed himself as a small-minded bully, attacking someone of obvious talent and character. "This is ridiculous," Tyler shouted, trying to regain control of the situation. "He's making a mockery of our concert, our traditions." But his words fell flat. The music continued, growing stronger and more beautiful with each passing moment. Other students in the band began to stand, adding their voices to the impromptu performance. In desperation, Tyler lunged forward and grabbed Marcus's trumpet, trying to wrench it away from him. The music stopped abruptly as the two boys struggled over the instrument. "Give it back," Tyler yelled. "You don't deserve this. You don't deserve any of this." The struggle lasted only a few seconds before Marcus's training took over. Without thinking, he shifted his weight, used Tyler's momentum against him, and sent the other boy stumbling backward. Tyler fell hard, his expensive suit torn and his dignity shattered. As he scrambled to get up, his face was flushed with humiliation and rage. "He attacked me!" Tyler screamed, pointing at Marcus. "Did you see that? He's violent, just like I said." But the audience had seen everything. They'd watched Tyler initiate the confrontation, grab Marcus's instrument, and essentially attack him while he was performing. Marcus's defensive response looked exactly like what it was: a young man protecting himself and his property. Jerome stood up in the audience, his military bearing evident as he assessed the situation. Detective Chen was already moving toward the stage, her hand near her radio. "That's enough," Mrs. Peterson said firmly, stepping between Tyler and Marcus. "Tyler, leave the stage immediately." "No!" Tyler shouted, his composure completely gone. "This is my school, my stage, my solo. He's nothing but a—" Tyler caught himself before finishing the sentence. But everyone in the auditorium knew what word he'd been about to use. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood quietly, his trumpet dented but still functional, his dignity intact despite the attack. The contrast between his composure and Tyler's meltdown was stark and undeniable. "Security, please escort Mr. Ashford from the premises," came a voice from the back of the auditorium. Principal Harrison, who had been conspicuously absent during most of Marcus's ordeal, had finally appeared. As security guards approached the stage, Tyler's panic reached its peak. His entire world was collapsing. His reputation, his future, his family's standing in the community, and in his desperation, he made one final, fatal mistake. "You people always play the victim," he screamed at Marcus. "Coming into our schools, taking our opportunities, and then crying racism when we defend what's ours. Well, I'm not going to let some— That's enough." Principal Harrison's voice boomed through the auditorium, but it was too late. Tyler had said the word, clearly and loudly, in front of hundreds of witnesses. The gasp that went up from the audience was audible. Parents covered their children's ears, teachers looked mortified, and even Tyler's remaining supporters shook their heads in disgust. Detective Chen was on stage now, her badge visible as she approached Tyler. "Tyler Ashford, you're under arrest for disturbing the peace, assault, and violation of your bail conditions regarding the ongoing hate crime investigation." As the detective read Tyler his rights, the reality of his situation finally seemed to hit him. The boy who had terrorized Marcus for months was reduced to tears, his carefully constructed facade of superiority crumbling completely. Jake and Brad, who had stood frozen during Tyler's meltdown, were also being questioned by police officers who had been stationed throughout the auditorium as a precaution. Marcus watched it all with a mixture of sadness and relief. He felt no joy in Tyler's downfall, only a profound sense that justice was finally being served. Principal Harrison approached Marcus as the police led Tyler away. "Mr. Williams, I owe you an apology. What happened here tonight should never have been allowed to reach this point." Marcus looked at the man who had been largely absent during his months of harassment. "An apology isn't enough, sir. This was never about just me. It's about the culture of this school that allowed this to happen." "You're absolutely right," Harrison said, to the surprise of many who knew him as someone who rarely admitted fault. "And I promise you, changes will be made." Mrs. Peterson stepped forward. "Marcus, would you like to finish your solo?" Marcus looked out at the audience. Hundreds of faces looking back at him with respect, admiration, and expectation. His grandmother was crying with pride, his uncle was beaming, and even students who had previously ignored him were applauding. "Yes," he said simply, "I would." This time, when Marcus raised his trumpet to his lips, the auditorium was completely silent, except for the gentle shuffling of people settling in to listen. He began the originally scheduled piece, but his interpretation was transformed by everything that had just happened. The music that emerged was powerful, defiant, and beautiful, a declaration that hatred could not silence truth, that violence could not overcome art, that fear could not defeat courage. When the last note faded, the auditorium erupted in a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. People were crying, cheering, and applauding not just for the music, but for what they had witnessed, a young man's triumph over injustice through grace, talent, and unshakable dignity. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at the Westbrook Academy spring concert spread throughout the community and beyond. Video recordings from multiple angles showed the entire confrontation, from Tyler's initial outburst to his final racist tirade. The recordings went viral on social media, but not in the way Tyler's family had feared. Instead of portraying Marcus as a violent threat, they showed him as a young man of extraordinary character who had responded to hatred with art and dignity. Tyler was expelled from Westbrook Academy and faced serious criminal charges. His acceptance to an Ivy League university was rescinded, and his family's law firm lost several major clients. Jake was also expelled and transferred to a military academy out of state. Brad's family quietly moved to another state entirely. But the real changes went deeper than individual consequences. The incident forced Westbrook Academy to confront its culture of privilege and exclusion. Principal Harrison, under pressure from the school board and community, instituted comprehensive reforms. A new diversity and inclusion program was established, with mandatory training for all staff and students. The disciplinary process was overhauled to ensure equal treatment regardless of family connections or financial status. Most importantly, a scholarship fund was created to bring more students from diverse backgrounds to the school. Mrs. Peterson was promoted to department head and given the resources to expand the music program. She worked closely with Marcus to develop a mentorship program that paired incoming scholarship students with successful upperclassmen. Detective Chen's investigation resulted in hate crime convictions for Tyler and his associates, establishing legal precedent for similar cases in the future. Her thorough work became a model for other law enforcement agencies dealing with school-based harassment. Marcus continued to excel academically and musically. His performance at the spring concert opened doors to summer music programs and scholarship opportunities at prestigious universities. More importantly, he had found his voice, not just as a musician, but as an advocate for justice and equality. Uncle Jerome's gym became a community center, offering not just martial arts training, but mentorship, tutoring, and life skills programs for young people from all backgrounds. The principles he had taught Marcus, discipline, respect, and controlled strength, became the foundation for a new generation of leaders. 6 months after the concert, Marcus was invited to speak at a conference on educational equity. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of educators, administrators, and activists, he reflected on his journey. "When I first walked into Westbrook Academy," he began, "I thought I was just there to play music and get an education. I didn't realize I was also there to teach some important lessons about courage, dignity, and the power of truth." He paused, remembering that night on the stage when he had chosen music over violence, art over anger. "The bullies who targeted me thought they could break me by making me feel like I didn't belong. What they didn't understand is that belonging isn't something someone else can give you or take away. It's something you claim for yourself through your actions, your character, and your commitment to your values." The audience listened in rapt attention as Marcus continued. They also didn't realize that when you try to tear down someone who has been trained, not just in martial arts, but in mental discipline and emotional control, you're fighting a battle you can't win. My uncle taught me to defend myself physically, but my grandmother and my community taught me something even more powerful: how to defend my dignity, my worth, and my right to exist in any space I've earned the right to occupy. Marcus went on to describe the changes at Westbrook Academy, the legal consequences for his harassers, and the broader conversation about equity and inclusion that had emerged from his experience. "The most important lesson from all of this," he concluded, "is that change is possible. Injustice thrives in darkness, in silence, in the assumption that people will accept the status quo rather than fight for something better. But when we shine light on the truth, when we refuse to be silenced, when we respond to hatred with dignity and strength, We can transform not just our own lives, but entire institutions. The standing ovation that followed reminded Marcus of that night at the concert, when he had chosen to play his trumpet instead of raising his fists. It was a choice that had changed everything, not just for him, but for everyone who witnessed it. As Marcus returned to his seat, he thought about Tyler, who was now serving community service and attending anger management classes as part of his sentence. There had been reports that the former bully was slowly beginning to understand the impact of his actions and was working to make amends. Marcus hoped it was true. He had learned that real victory wasn't about destroying your enemies. It was about creating a world where such enemies could no longer exist, where prejudice and hatred were replaced by understanding and respect. The conference ended with participants committing to specific actions they would take in their own communities and institutions. Marcus watched as educators, administrators, and activists networked and planned, knowing that his story had become part of a larger movement for change. Later that evening, Marcus called his grandmother to tell her about the conference. "I'm proud of you, baby," she said, her voice warm with love. "But I always knew you had it in you. You're carrying forward everything your parents, your uncle, and I tried to teach you." "I know, Nana, and I'm going to keep carrying it forward. That's what we do," she said. "Each generation lifts up the next one, and the next one lifts up the one after that. You're not just Marcus Williams anymore. You're part of something bigger." As Marcus hung up the phone, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that first day at Westbrook Academy. He had walked into that school as a talented but uncertain teenager, carrying his trumpet and his dreams. He was leaving as a young man who understood his own power and his responsibility to use it for good. The bullies who had targeted him, thinking they were dealing with just another scholarship student they could intimidate and exclude, had been unaware that they were actually confronting someone trained not just in physical combat, but in the far more powerful arts of mental discipline, emotional control, and moral courage. They had tried to break him and instead had awakened something stronger, not just in Marcus, but in everyone who witnessed his journey. His story became a reminder that true strength isn't about dominating others, but about lifting them up. That real power isn't about excluding people, but about creating space for everyone to thrive. The spring concert that was supposed to showcase Tyler's privileged position instead became the stage for a different kind of performance, one that demonstrated the transformative power of responding to hatred with grace, to violence with art, to injustice with unwavering commitment to truth. In the end, Marcus's greatest victory wasn't defeating his bullies. It was showing everyone, including himself, what was possible when someone refused to be diminished by hatred and instead chose to rise above it. His trumpet had become more than an instrument. It was a voice for change, a call for justice, and a reminder that music, like truth, has the power to transform hearts and minds. Years later, when Marcus had graduated from college and was beginning his career as both a professional musician and an education advocate, he would return to Westbrook Academy as a guest speaker. The school that had once been a place of torment had become something different, a truly inclusive institution that celebrated diversity and actively worked to prevent the kind of harassment Marcus had endured. Standing in that same auditorium where he had faced down Tyler's hatred with his trumpet, Marcus would look out at a student body that looked like America, black, white, Latino, Asian, and everything in between, all learning together, all supported to reach their full potential. The scholarship program he had inspired had brought dozens of talented students to the school, and the mentorship program Mrs. Peterson had developed ensured that no student would face the isolation and harassment that Marcus had endured. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day. As Marcus would tell those future students, the key to overcoming hatred and injustice wasn't found in revenge or violence, but in the quiet strength that comes from knowing your own worth, the discipline to control your reactions under pressure, and the courage to stand up for what's right even when you're standing alone. His story became a testament to the power of preparation, not just the musical training that earned him his scholarship, or the martial arts training that gave him confidence and control, but the moral training that taught him to respond to his lowest moments with his highest values. The bullies had targeted what they thought was just another black boy in band class, unaware that they were actually confronting someone who had been prepared his entire life for exactly this kind of challenge. They had expected him to react with anger and violence, giving them the excuse they needed to justify their prejudice and maintain their privilege. Instead, they discovered that true strength isn't about fighting. It's about knowing when not to fight and having the discipline and wisdom to choose a better way. Marcus's trumpet became his weapon of choice, and his music became the force that transformed not just his own life, but an entire community's understanding of what courage, dignity, and justice really look like. In the end, the boy who had been trained by an MMA legend taught everyone a lesson that no martial arts gym could provide, that the most powerful force in the world isn't physical strength, but the strength of character that allows someone to respond to hatred with love, to violence with peace, and to injustice with an unwavering commitment to making the world a better place for everyone.